In 1896, a New Zealand farmer came up with a strange and ambitious idea to transport 400 heads of a hybrid sheep breed, raised primarily for their wool.
Imagine leaving hundreds of sheep on a remote, barren island with no one to care for them, an experiment many expected to fail. Yet, decades later, not only had these animals survived, they had transformed into something unrecognizable, defying all odds. How did these farm-raised sheep turn into hardy, wild creatures thriving in one of the harshest climates on Earth? This is the story of survival, evolution, and unexpected adaptation against all odds. It reveals how life can flourish in isolation, rewriting the rules we thought we knew about nature. And it all began with a strange choice to abandon thousands on an island surrounded by nothing but wind and rocks. A failed experiment begins. In 1896, a curious and risky decision was made by a farmer in New Zealand to send 400 heads of a hybrid sheep breed to a remote, deserted island. This island, Campbell Island, was nothing but wind, rocks, and cold, with no human inhabitants to tend to the livestock. These sheep were specially bred for wool production, a craft demanding close human care, especially regular shearing. This experiment was soon doomed. The farmer left the island, abandoning the sheep to face the harsh environment on their own, without any human support or intervention. At first glance, the choice to send delicate, domesticated sheep to such a barren, isolated place seemed reckless. Sheep are fragile creatures, dependent on humans for food, protection, and shearing. Without regular shearing, their wool can overgrow, severely impairing movement and health. Animals bred for domestication typically lack the survival instincts necessary to thrive in the wild, especially in an unforgiving environment like Campbell Island. This left little hope for the fledgling flock's survival, leading many to assume the sheep would quickly perish. But the course of events took an unexpected turn. Years passed with no human presence, and the island was largely forgotten. When explorers returned nearly 75 years later, the sheep had not only survived, they had multiplied and thrived. These creatures that were once helpless under human care had transformed into hardy animals, radically different from their original breeds. Rather than a failure, the abandoned flock had become a living experiment in survival and adaptation, raising many questions about nature's resilience. What made the difference between inevitable extinction and unexpected survival? The answer lies partly in the peculiar conditions of Campbell Island itself and the natural pressures that forced rapid adaptation. The initial hardships weeded out sheep unsuited to the wild, while those with traits better aligned to survival endured and passed on their genes. This slow, silent natural selection began reshaping the flock from within, evolving something entirely new. Intriguingly, this transformation was not noticed for decades, allowing a nearly unnoticed wildlife experiment to unfold in isolation. The story challenges assumptions about domesticated animals' dependence on humans and reshapes how we think about survival, evolution, and adaptability. It sets the stage for a remarkable tale of life, persisting against all odds. The fate of those first sheep serves as a stark reminder of nature's unpredictability and the power of environmental forces to rewrite the story of any species. It also hints at a deeper mystery residing on the windswept shores of Campbell Island, waiting to be fully uncovered. But before this story of survival could unfold, the island itself had a long and varied history that shaped its unique environment. Campbell Island's harsh environment. Campbell Island lies in the remote South Pacific Ocean and was first discovered in 1810 during a sealing expedition led by an Australian captain. Its name honors the Sydney-based Campbell brothers who owned the ship navigating those waters. For decades, the island served as a base for hunting sea lions and supporting whaling ships, offering a strategic but forbidding outpost amid the vast ocean. Despite these human activities, the island remained largely wild and untamed. The geography of Campbell Island is rugged and dramatic. Rocky cliffs rise sharply from cold, turbulent seas, creating natural barriers that shield the island from many predators, but also isolate it from human intervention. The island's remote location and harsh weather conditions, cold temperatures, fierce winds, and frequent storms make survival here a challenge for virtually any species. The environment is not forgiving and requires special adaptations for life to thrive. The flora of the island is nothing but unique and diverse, greatly dominated by the mega herbs, which are the large-stemmed plants that can endure the difficult conditions of the island and absorb considerable sunlight. This island's primary food sources are formed by these mega herbs and other hardy plants. The abundant and nutritionally rich plant life was a temporary food source for the newly introduced sheep that were able to live in a region that seemed hostile otherwise due to the tough conditions. The island, although a paradise, was harsh and unforgiving at the same time. The harsh winds kept the insect pests like flies away, which was somewhat good for the sheep as the reduction of certain health burdens resulted. But the strong weather and limited plant diversity together meant that food would always be a scarce resource, which any expanding population could easily overuse. Campbell Island's seclusion and special ecosystem made it a birthplace for unexpected evolutionary experiments and a fragile ecosystem that needed careful protection. The climatic and geographical features created a natural lab where adaptation was not only possible but actually required. To be able to understand the above-mentioned conditions is a necessity in order to appreciate the incredible voyage of the sheep that were left behind, as they not only had to confront the challenges from nature but also had to deal with the pressures of surviving without the help of humans. The island had a great influence on the sheep through evolution, just as they did on their own fate through evolution. But even such a well-suited environment could not sustain the initially booming sheep population forever. Over the years, the limits of food and resources began to take their toll. Sheep farming growth and decline. After the initial release of 400 sheep, the farming operation on Campbell Island expanded significantly under a new leaseholder, Captain Tucker. He sent 3 more shipments, each bringing about 1,000 sheep, mostly merino breeds or merino crossbreeds, preferred for their high-quality wool. By 1913, the flock had ballooned to between 7,000 and 8,000 animals, reflecting rapid growth and initial success in this remote farming venture. The island's diverse forage, notably the mega herbs and other plants absorbing strong sunlight, initially sustained this rapid population increase. The sheep took advantage of these abundant resources, and the pastoral lease system allowed for continued farming expansion in this way. The animals were carefully tended, shorn regularly, and the wool harvested for economic gain. The operation seemed to be thriving, despite the island's remoteness. However, this prosperity was fragile. By the late 1920s, signs of strain on the island's ecosystem began to emerge. The natural plants and grasses that supported the sheep's diet started to suffer from overgrazing. The sheep population pressured the island's flora, depleting key food sources and upsetting the ecological balance. There was a clear decline in vegetation quantity and quality, making survival increasingly difficult. This environmental degradation directly impacted the flock's health and numbers. By 1931, the sheep population had fallen to 4,000 individuals. The decrease was significant enough to raise concerns about the sustainability of the farming operation. Managing such a large flock under these conditions had become economically and ecologically unfeasible. Meanwhile, the workers on the island faced hardship of a different kind. Stranded without a boat or communication for 2 years, they endured isolation and uncertainty, dependent on limited provisions and survival skills. Eventually, the government arranged their evacuation, but the economic value of the sheep's wool did not cover the cost of the trip, and workers received no wages, adding a human cost to an already struggling enterprise. Ultimately, in 1931, the farming project was abandoned. Humans left the island, ending all active sheep husbandry. The animals remained behind to face their fate alone. This abandonment left the sheep population vulnerable, especially since they had been bred for domestication rather than survival in the wild. The situation seemed bleak for the remaining flock. Remarkably, after this decline and abandonment, the sheep population did not vanish. Instead, a slow and nearly unnoticed transformation began. The island's vegetation began to recover as the sheep numbers diminished, providing new opportunities for the survivors. The stage was set for an evolutionary process that would reshape the flock in surprising ways. The story of how the sheep endured and adapted following this collapse hints at lessons about resilience and natural selection, unfolding over the next decades in isolation. The island and its residents had undergone dramatic change, but nature's quiet work was only beginning to reveal its true power. Survival against the odds. When the farming operation on Campbell Island was abandoned in 1931, in a world they were never meant to survive in. These were domesticated animals, bred for high-quality wool and sustained by human care. Without regular shearing, their dense wool could become a lethal burden, restricting movement and risking infection. But to everyone's surprise, despite facing starvation, harsh weather, and no protection, the sheep did not vanish. They adapted. The early years following abandonment were harsh. Many sheep died quickly, unable to cope with the extreme conditions or find enough food. Those lacking traits suited for survival left no offspring, and their line ended quietly. However, a subset of sheep carried traits, genetic or behavioral, that allowed them to endure. These survivors reproduced, passing those advantageous traits to their lambs. Over time, natural selection favored those animals best equipped to live independently in the wild. Another crucial factor was the island's isolation and lack of predators. Without natural enemies lurking, the sheep faced fewer threats besides the environment itself. This absence of predation gave them a fighting chance, even as food resources fluctuated. As sheep numbers initially declined, the island's vegetation had time to regenerate. Mega herbs and other plants flourished anew, creating a recovering ecosystem that gradually supported a growing population of hardier sheep. This continuum of deterioration and revival has lasted for many years. In the year of 1958, the flock was already rising after a long human absence. The sheep living on this harsh land were no longer the same. They had increased in number and were a little more determined in their possession of the land. They had mastered the art of quarreling with the strong winds, eating the tough native plants, and even grazing for long hours under freezing conditions and heavy downpours. Their existence was nothing but proof of their endurance. Sheep were grazing from dawn to dusk, and often they turned their backs to the wind so their faces would not be exposed. That way, they could continuously feed. The animals' instincts and their ways of life had already been very much influenced by the harshness of the environment. It was a silent communication between survival and adaptation that was taking place on the island's cliffs and meadows. The adaptations were more of a comprehensive nature than mere behavior changes. The surviving sheep had those traits that made them the strongest over the others, who depended on the humans for care. And such traits were strong limbs and tough digestive systems to cope with the island's greens. They started looking like a new breed entirely, a breed that had been formed by harsh environmental factors rather than human selection over the years. What's happening on Campbell Island is one of the strongest illustrations of how life will always find a way, even if it takes very slim chances to do so. An unparalleled flock that was deserted turned into a different one. The whole episode of Survival narrates the subtle and powerful ways of natural selection in real time. Still, the nature of their transformation went beyond mere survival. It evolved into something profound. The sheep's evolutionary changes. By the time humans returned to Campbell Island in the 1970s, the sheep were no longer the familiar merino breeds deposited decades earlier. Instead, they had evolved a suite of surprising physical and behavioral adaptations, marking them as nearly unrecognizable from their domestic ancestors. Their limbs had lengthened, allowing better movement on rugged terrain, and they carried themselves with a wild, alert posture rarely seen in farm sheep. Their wool had transformed dramatically as well. Years of constant exposure to wind, rain, and cold weather weathered and damaged their fleeces. Unlike the thick, uniform wool of domestic sheep, The island sheep's coats were patchy and coarse, shedding naturally in a way reminiscent of their wild progenitors. This shedding was critical. It prevented the harmful overgrowth of wool that can endanger sheep lacking human shearing. Their jaws, too, bore the marks of their harsh diet. Feeding on tough, fibrous native plants required strong, durable teeth and jaws. This led to noticeable warping and reshaping, further evidence of their adaptation to the demands of Campbell Island's greenery. When biologists tried to feed them traditional hay upon capture, the sheep struggled to adjust, repeatedly pulling hay out of place as if trying to manipulate food like they did in the wild. Scientists adapted by tying hay bundles to mimic the sheep's accustomed foraging style. Behaviorally, the sheep had also changed. They exhibited new habits like giving birth while standing, and their lambs could walk within minutes after birth. Traits aligned with wild, free-ranging animals that must be ready to flee predators at a moment's notice. These signs pointed to a deep shift in the population's survival strategies, honed by necessity rather than domestication. The sheep also developed resistance to at least 2 diseases present on the island, further illustrating how natural selection filtered the flock to favor those with advantageous immune responses. This resistance was another mark of their evolving identity, blending genetics and environment into a new whole. Their daily routines reflected a fierce determination to survive. Grazing from 4 in the morning until 11 at night, regardless of rain or wind, they demonstrated stamina and an unyielding commitment to securing nutrition. Turning backs to the unrelenting gale, they adapted their postures in ways that conserved energy and protected vulnerable body parts. Taken all together, these physical and behavioral changes marked the sheep as a new, emerging form, one shaped less by human design and more by the raw forces of nature. Their story is a rare and vivid example of how isolation and environment can drive rapid evolutionary change in a formerly domestic species. The transformation of Campbell Island's sheep from fragile livestock to hardy wild survivors rewrites assumptions about domestication, evolution, and resilience. It reminds us that life is not static, and that even the most vulnerable creatures can rewrite their destinies when pushed to extremes. The island's story of survival leads naturally to the next chapter: how the world responded to this remarkable transformation. Conservation and conflict. By the mid-20th century, a change in perspective began to influence how Campbell Island was managed. Recognizing the unique and fragile ecology of the island, the government moved to protect its native flora and fauna. In 1937, it was designated for conservation purposes, and in 1954, Campbell Island officially became a nature reserve. These steps marked a shift from allowing agricultural use to prioritizing the preservation of natural habitats and species. This new conservation focus placed the introduced sheep population in an awkward position. Though they had survived and adapted impressively, the sheep were non-native and viewed as a threat to the island's recovering ecosystems. Their continued grazing posed risks to native plant life, potentially undoing decades of ecological recovery. With growing environmental awareness, authorities saw that the sheep had to be controlled, if not removed entirely, to protect the island's indigenous biodiversity. By 1958, scientific surveys estimated that fewer than 1,000 sheep remained on Campbell Island. Although numbers had recovered somewhat since the initial collapse, the population was a shadow of its early 20th century peak. Fearing the environmental damage from even these remaining sheep, the government began implementing drastic measures to curb their numbers. A fence was constructed across the island to partition grazing areas and assist in managing the sheep population. Teams were organized to carry out culling operations over consecutive years, resulting in the elimination of around 3,000 sheep. These eradication efforts were difficult and controversial, balancing ecological necessity against the loss of a unique and thriving animal population. By the late 1980s, the last of the sheep on Campbell Island had been removed. For some, this marked the end of an era, sparking sadness over the loss of a distinct flock that had evolved in isolation. Yet many understood the necessity of these actions to protect the island's natural balance and guarantee the survival of native species and habitats. Conservation often involves hard choices, and in this case, the survival of the original ecosystem took precedence. Nonetheless, it was not the case that every sheep perished as a result of the campaign against them. A tiny number of sheep, around 20, were saved during the rescue operations in the years 1975 and 1976, and they were shipped to New Zealand to become the founders of a new flock. Due to their extremely wild ways, the animals were very hard to catch and required the use of special whistles, and meticulously directing the lambs to gather them was very successful. Scientists finally got hold of 58 sheep, which was a major advancement in the conservation of their exclusive genetics. The sheep, after being moved, displayed remarkable differences from their mainland relatives. They had a larger size and looked healthy, with the newborns continuing to grow up perfectly, even though they were of their wild parentage. They were, however, difficult to maintain in captivity. The mothers had to be constantly watched. Their instincts trained in a harsh environment required it, and taking care of the lambs in a healthy manner was a demanding and expensive project. Agricultural experts went through the 58 sheep and picked 10 healthy ones very carefully for the purpose of forming a breeding herd. They were tied and carried on foot over the hilly region to the ships that were waiting, which was a strenuous but crucial operation to make sure their survival off the island. The breeding of the sheep in captivity became the main way to protect the genetically different Campbell Island sheep, keeping the hope alive for their future beyond the wild. At present, the conservation of this rare flock is still a hot topic of discussion and is thought to promote a debate about how to strike a proper balance between human intervention and the natural process of evolution. The saga of the sheep of Campbell Island is illustrative of the bigger questions about conservation and the need for humans to take responsibility, and at the same time, to give up some of the land that is wild and inhabited by extraordinary creatures that sometimes pop up there. The journey of these extraordinary sheep leads us next to the challenges and triumphs of their rescue and ongoing preservation in captivity. Sheep rescue and captive breeding. Capturing the sheep from Campbell Island presented a formidable challenge. Over decades of living free in the wild, these animals had shed much of their domesticated nature and developed wary, wild dispositions. Scientists and conservationists found it difficult to round up the sheep, often relying on specially trained whistles to herd them toward corrals. The task demanded patience, resilience, and careful planning. After great effort, 58 sheep were successfully captured and transported to New Zealand. There, the animals appeared remarkably robust, with large bodies resembling their ancestral breeds. Their lambs inherited this vigor, signaling hope for the continuation of this unique genetic lineage. Despite that promise, transitioning the sheep from the wild to captivity was not seamless. The stark change in environment and care requirements tested both animals and their human guardians. One of the most pressing challenges involved the sheep's maternal care. These wild adapted sheep devoted significant attention to their young, requiring extra care and monitoring by researchers. This heightened need for maternal investment was both an indicator of their wild heritage and an added responsibility for those tasked with their well-being. Raising healthy lambs under these conditions took considerable dedication and resources. To establish a stable breeding population, the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries selected 10 healthy sheep from the group to act as the foundation herd. These individuals were carefully tethered using dog collars to manage their movement during transport. In physically demanding efforts, scientists carried the sheep one by one across a steep hill roughly 1.2 miles away to waiting ships for relocation. The strategy to maintain and expand the flock involved monitoring genetics closely to avoid inbreeding and preserve the unique traits these sheep had evolved. Maintaining genetic diversity was essential given the small population size and their isolated history. Continuous breeding programs aimed to balance the need for survival with the preservation of exceptional adaptations that made these sheep special. Despite careful management, the lineage faced setbacks. In 2017, 5 rare sheep were stolen and butchered, a devastating blow that reduced numbers drastically. At that point, only about 30 individuals remained, placing the flock in a precarious position. The loss was not only emotional for their owner, but also a significant genetic setback, especially since some culled sheep were pregnant and expected to give birth soon. This event underscored the vulnerability of rare breeds and the challenges of protecting small populations from human threats. It raised awareness about the importance of security measures and community support in the conservation of endangered livestock. The stolen sheep, believed to be taken for meat, highlighted ongoing risks faced by such unique genetic resources. Still, the remaining sheep continue to live and reproduce, holding on to their extraordinary heritage. Their survival in captivity embodies a fragile triumph of conservation efforts, preserving genetics forged in isolation and natural selection. They stand as living testaments to both nature's power and humanity's responsibility in safeguarding biodiversity. The story of rescue and breeding reminds us that even in the face of loss, hope persists, and that ancient bonds between species and place can find new life through care and commitment. Lessons on evolution and isolation. The story of the Campbell Island sheep offers a fascinating window into how isolation can act as a powerful catalyst for evolution. When a species is cut off from the rest of the world, it is forced to adapt to unique conditions, often very quickly in geological terms. On Campbell Island, the sheep had to learn to survive without human intervention in a harsh, wind-swept environment unlike any they had known before. Their transformation demonstrates the potentials for rapid and significant change when natural selection pressures act unimpeded. Isolation creates a kind of evolutionary pressure cooker, compressing time and intensifying natural selection. For the sheep, those unable to handle the cold, find scarce food, or shield themselves from the constant wind did not survive to pass on their genes. Over generations, this led to physical and behavioral traits distinctly different from their original breed. The island became a natural laboratory, showing us evolution in action and highlighting the resilience and flexibility of life. Another profound lesson is the complexity of human impact on ecosystems. The sheep were introduced by humans with economic goals, yet once abandoned, they effectively went wild, evolving without direction but under new natural constraints. This unintended experiment challenges clear-cut ideas about domestication. It reveals that even animals heavily shaped by humans can reclaim independence and evolve in surprising ways when left alone. Yet, the Campbell Island sheep story also highlights the delicate balance between preserving genetic uniqueness and protecting native ecosystems. While the flock evolved into a distinct population, their grazing ultimately threatened the island's native plants and animals. Conservation efforts aim to restore the island's original biodiversity, even at the cost of eliminating much of the sheep population. This tension illustrates difficult realities in managing isolated environments disturbed by human intervention. Captive breeding programs have played a crucial role in preserving the sheep's unique genetics after their removal from the island. These efforts underscore the importance of protecting rare and isolated populations before they vanish entirely. Such programs can maintain genetic diversity and provide a living record of evolutionary processes that might otherwise be lost. They remind us that human responsibility extends beyond initial introduction and into long-term stewardship. The case of the Campbell Island sheep not only induces us to think about how other species could react in a similar fashion, but also leads us to the same question. Isolation has been the main reason for the origin of different species in many islands all over the world. It is no wonder that the famous Darwin finches, for example, have originated this way. Sheep are a good example that even domesticated species can be subject to evolution if proper conditions are imposed. Such occurrences represent special situations for researchers to gain insights into the complex processes of speciation and adaptation, and into the vagueness of the borders between wild and domestic. In addition, the tale brings forward the issue of the often unanticipated consequences of human actions. The economic activity that was at the origin of the sheep became an unintended natural experiment of great significance, with repercussions that no one could predict. It puts into light that the ecological processes are sometimes able to draw their own clock and operate at a very different speed than the human one, thus being able to create, resist, and evolve in the time of humans. This unpredictability should be the main consideration when making decisions regarding the management of wild species and the introduction of new ones. The sheep at Campbell Island have shown that isolation can lead to a huge change in the genetic makeup of a population and, eventually, to the birth of a new species. However, the introduction of the sheep by humans and their later removal have greatly influenced what could have been a longer evolutionary process. It is a reminder that, although preservation work is necessary, in some cases it can also affect the passage of natural history in ways that we do not expect. In the end, the story of these sheep shows us the process of evolution, while teaching us to be modest in the presence of nature's supremacy. It puts the human-nature relationship into the picture, emphasizing the fact that our influence can be very strong even when we do not intend to. Their saga is one of attraction, of offering respect, and of a bet that we will not let the fragile marvels of the isolated ecosystems disappear. The Campbell Island sheep reveal a remarkable tale of survival, adaptation, and evolution in isolation. From abandoned livestock to a unique wild population, their story challenges what we know about life's resilience. If you found this journey as fascinating as I did, please like the video and subscribe for more incredible stories from nature's hidden corners. Thank you for watching,